Hello and welcome to the next reading from John Wesley Evangelist by Skevington Wood. This reading is chapter 11 from part 2 in the book, and it's entitled A Convenient Place. And this reading is about 10 and a bit pages. So from the volume 2 of the journal, page 182. At 4 in the afternoon there were above 3,000 in a convenient place near Bristol, to whom I declared, the hour is coming, and now is, when the dead shall hear the voice of the Son of God, and they that hear shall live. One of the major problems of open-air preaching is to find a suitable stance. A great deal depends on the right location. Wesley was as much aware of this as any modern evangelist. As the years passed and he returned again and again to the same towns, he made for some familiar spot which had already been tested by use. But in the pioneer days, or whenever even at a later period, he ventured to break new ground, the choice of a preaching place exercised him considerably. Sometimes changed circumstances in an often visited area raised the matter again. The question was where I should preach. He wrote in his journal for the 27th of May, 1787. He was on his farewell tour of Ireland, and he had come to Clones once more. Church service was over on this Sunday afternoon, and he was looking for a stand. The weather conditions, furious wind and violent rain, made it impracticable for him to preach in the marketplace as he had planned. Eventually he stood in a doorway to address the people. In May 1756, on an earlier tour, he had reached Clonmel, which he described as the pleasantest town beyond all comprehension, which I have yet seen in Ireland. That evening he proclaimed the gospel in a large loft capable of holding 500 or 600 people. It was not full, however, because there were doubts about its safety. This was obviously not the next best place for a meeting, and in any case the owner forbade its use on the next day. An approach was made to the commanding officer of the militia in the town with a view to securing the barrack yard. He replied that it was unavailable for such a purpose. Not that I have any objection to Mr. Wesley, he quickly added. I will hear him if he preaches under the gallows. In the end, Wesley decided to preach in the street, and as a result the congregation was more than doubled. Both officers and men were amongst them, as well as the mayor. The latter proved an asset in restraining a drunk who tried to disturb the service. The choice of a site was sometimes left to the local Methodists, and was not always a happy one. I always desired to preach at Worksop, Wesley noted on the 29th of July 1780, but when I came they had not fixed on any place. At length they chose a lamentable one, full of dirt and dust, but without the least shelter from the scorching sun. This few could bear, so we had only a small company of as stupid people as ever I saw. It's from 29th of July 1780. If Wesley's comments now and then tended towards acidity, it was because he was jealous for the work of God. His impatience with inefficient arrangements was a reflection of his concern to ensure that only the best was offered in the Master's service. In this chapter, we propose to review Wesley's preaching stations, not as they later appeared on the Methodist plans, when meeting houses were erected, but as they originally were in the open air or in some borrowed building. Most of Wesley's sermons, especially in the earlier years of his itinerant ministry, were preached neither in church nor chapel, but in some convenient place where the people could easily gather. An analysis of these, as they are indicated in the journal, had not been fully attempted before, so far as can be ascertained, and if what follows sounds rather like a catalogue, it is because only so can we grasp the range of Wesley's improvised pulpits. We shall begin with the outdoor stances and then list those inside. Quite often, all we are told is that Wesley stood in the street, or as at Adwalton, in a broad part of the highway, thus 3rd of June 1742. Some of the streets are actually named Prince Street in Bristol, Barrack Street in Tullamore, Ship Street and Marlborough Street in Dublin, and Sandgate in Newcastle. He preached at Prince Street in Bristol on the 18th of September 1763, Barrack Street in Tullamore on the 15th of July 1756, Ship Street and Marlborough Street 25th of March 1748, and Sandgate in Newcastle on the 30th of May 1742. In other instances, it is simply in the main street, as at Pocklington on the 15th of July 1757, Pembroke, 1st of September 1767, Bulliff Wells, 30th of August 1747, and Wakefield, 20th of August 1748, amongst others. Later references often clarify this more general statement by pinpointing the exact spot. Open squares were common gathering places, not only for the purpose of evangelism, but for political or other demonstrations too. Amongst those specifically mentioned are Charles Square in Hoxton, 7th of June 1741, Ratcliffe Square near Stepney, 25th of May 1742, Blake Square in York, better known now as St Helens Square, 11th of July 1757, and the Linen Hall in Lisbon, 4th of May 1765, so called a large square with piazzas on three sides of it, as Wesley explained. Others can be identified: St Martin's Square, Chester, 22nd of May 1752, King's Square at Bristol, 4th of September 1763, St George's Square, Portsmouth, 11th of August 1785, and Paradise Square, Sheffield, 28th of June 1780. One of the fascinating items in the collection of Wesley relics housed in Brunswick Chapel, Newcastle upon Tyne, is a colour engraving of the evangelist standing in Hospital Square in that city. He has just finished preaching from the stone steps which lead to the upper story of the Guildhall. He is being protected from the mob by a fishwife. She was a muckle woman, we are told, and afforded an ample screen for the diminutive Wesley. She flung her arms around him and shouted in broad Tyneside, If only you know ye lifts another hand to touch me, canny man, I'll floor ye directly. She ran, I apologise if that's not my best Geordie accent. She ran by the horse's side down Sandgate as Wesley left, crying, No touch the little man if ye dare. And that's from Gill's book In the Steps of John Wesley, page 148. Wesley's most frequently used post was in the marketplace, the most natural focus in an 18th century town. Often he used the steps of the Market Cross, as he did at Epworth on the 21st of April 1745, the 22nd of February 1747, and the 9th of June 1755. As he exhorted the people there, did his mind go back to the day when he caught the coach from that very spot to go to school at Charterhouse. The cross was recently damaged and there is talk of removing it. Wesley often preached at Bolton Cross, and a photograph from a reconstructed model shows that the top of the steps rose to quite a height. It faced the parish church, and behind are the stocks. On one occasion, the champion prize fighter in Lancashire climbed up on the cross to duel the unruly crowd by threatening those who were causing the disturbance. Other spots close to the market were also utilised. In Newark, Wesley preached in the covered shambles, or meat market, with one end open to the street and the other abutting on Middlegate. 2,000 or 3,000 people managed to squeeze in. That was 12th of June 1780. The town hall now occupies the site. In Truro, Wesley once preached in the piazza next to the coinage hall. That's 27th of August 1776. He probably stood under the arches whilst the people listened in a square off Powder Street. At Skipton he preached near the bridge, and a cottage at the foot of Chapel Hill marks the site of what was called John Wesley's Forum. That was 26th of June 1764, and see Gill's book In the Steps of John Wesley. One of the most famous of Wesley's open-air pulpits was at Wednesbury, and is still preserved. He preached 30 or 40 times in the High Bullen, so called because here the cruel sport of bull baiting was staged. The Black Country was notorious for its addiction. Wesley stood on a flight of steps outside a malt house. Carts would back up to unload. This horse block now stands in front of the Springhead Mission. The lower steps are of brick and have clearly been restored, but the top stones are original. We can safely say that they were trodden by the soles of Wesley's trim black shoes. The evangelist often preached in the precincts of a castle. We hear of him in the court at Fonmon, on the steps at Cardiff, and in the yard at Lincoln, Cockermouth, and Dungannon. Cardiff, 2nd of September 1747, Lincoln, 1st of September 1758, Cockermouth, 13th of June 1781, and Dungannon, 19th of June 1752. And I think there's another one, 14th of June 1789, but it doesn't say. At Aberdeen he stood on the paved stones at the gate, and at Castletown in the Isle of Man just outside. Aberdeen, 1st of May 1768, and Isle of Man, Castletown, 30th of June 1777. At Corfe he preached in front of the Well Court under the shadow of the castle on the 5th of September 1776, and at Swansea on one of the lawns surrounded by high old walls, 27th of August 1755. Rougemont Castle in Exeter, the seat of the Anglo-Saxon kings, provided an ideal venue. There were gathered together, as some imagined, half the grown persons in the city. It was an awful sight, so vast a congregation in that solemn amphitheatre, and all silent and still as I explained at large and enforced that glorious truth. Happy are they whose iniquities are forgiven and whose sins are covered. That's the 28th of August 1743. Moving from town to the countryside, Wesley would find that a hill was an obvious vantage point for a speaker. Since the days of our Lord's Sermon on the Mount, the messengers of the cross have sought out similar eminences, though often on a smaller scale than the traditional setting in Galilee. Natural contours combine to form an auditorium. At South Biddick, a mining village near Newcastle upon Tyne, the spot where Wesley spoke was just at the bottom of a semicircular hill, on the rising sides of which many hundreds stood, but far more on the plain beneath. That was 22nd of March 1743. He was so impressed with it that weekly preaching was started there. Down in Falmouth he used Pike's Hill with its smooth top, 18th of August 1789. Up in Edinburgh he went both to Colton Hill and the Mound. At Colton Hill, 27th of May 1764, and the Mound, 2nd of August 1767. At Otley he preached at the foot of the Chevin, 17th of July 1759. It is hardly a high mountain. At Helston he occupied a rising ground about a musket shot from the town. On the 3rd of September 1755, and at Gauxholm the congregation stood and sat row above row in the Sylvan Theatre on a mountainside, 21st of July 1759. There was a similar scene at Heptonstall, not far away, where the place where Wesley preached was, he said, an oval spot of ground, surrounded with spreading trees, scooped out, as it were, in the side of the hill, which rose like a theatre, 26th of August 1748, and again on 18th of May 1757. It was known as Dicky Brown Hay. In Cornwall, the downs were frequently used, and in Yorkshire, the moors. In Gateshead, Wesley preached on a smooth part of the fell, and a large stone is preserved at one of the nearby Methodist chapels on which he is supposed to have stood. 8th of March 1743. At Matlock, Bath, he took his stand under the hollow of a rock. On the 27th of July 1761. And at Cryche, he preached from an outcrop on the Tors Ridge above the town. On the edge of Dartmoor, he preached from the White Rock on the mount near Stickle Path, and through the years the granite boulder has been treated with an annual cost of whitewash to mark the site, 1st of April 1744. At St Ives, on one windy day, he found a little enclosure on rising ground with native rock 10 or 12 feet high. A jutting out of the rock, about 4 feet from the ground, gave me a very convenient pulpit, he reported, 10th of September 1760. On other occasions, a hollow formed his auditorium. There was one called Holloway Bank at Wednesbury, near the bridge over the Team. It could hold 4,000 or 5,000 people, according to Wesley's estimate. They stood in a semicircle, one above another. That's 9th of January 1743. There was another near Limerick, near the old camp. The ground sloped upwards so that the congregation sat on the grass, row above row, 2nd of July 1758. A third at Morvar in Cornwall was just like a theatre, 11th of September 1757. The hollow at Birstall was evidently the largest of all, for Wesley imagined that it might contain 60,000, and that a strong, clear voice could command them all, 4th of May 1755. But of course the most famous was at Gwenup, although this was only partly natural, the grass having grown over disused mine works. Wesley considered it to be far the finest I know in the kingdom. It is a round green hollow, gently shelving down, about 50 feet deep, but I suppose it is 200 across one way and near 300 the other, 14th of September 1756. On that visit he calculated the congregation to be full 20,000 people, but some years later he took it to be over 30,000. It fell into disrepair after Wesley's death, but was restored in 1806. Each spring bank holiday Monday, a well-attended service is held there. Its present measurements are somewhat smaller than those Wesley gave. Wesley's first open-air preaching in London was at Whitfield's sites, at Moorfields, Blackheath and Kennington Common. 17th of June 1739 at Moorfields, Blackheath 14th of June 1739 and Kennington 17th of June 1739. These were far from reputable places in the 18th century. Moorfields had once been very fashionable, with gravel walks lined with elms. It was known as the City Mole, but by Wesley's time it had become a general recreation ground where all sorts of social undesirables resorted. See Walter Besant's book London in the 18th Century, published in 1892. Kennington Common was even worse. It was a neglected waste and the place of execution most in use after Tyburn. It was not unusual to see men hanging there in chains. Not surprisingly, it was, as Tyerman described in his book Life of George Whitfield, the rendezvous of London riffraffs. Blackheath, on the other hand, was in a much more respectable neighbourhood. It is typical of Wesley that he concentrated on the disreputable spots. In the villages he was to be found most often on the green. He also used the parks and common land in the towns or cities which bore this name. Bedminster Green at Bristol on the 5th of October 1755. Southern Hay Green in Exeter, which is now covered with Georgian houses, 29th of August 1762. Carr Green at Stockport, 29th of May 1759. St Peter's Green at Bedford, 16th of October 1753. And Oxmantown Green, Dublin, 24th of April 1748, are all mentioned. At Colchester he preached on St John's Green at the side of a high wall, a place that seemed to be made on purpose, 27th of October 1758. In his rural tours, Wesley frequently held his service in a field or a meadow as he normally described it. One at Cliro in Wales was large and smooth, 30th of September 1747. At Durham it was pleasantly situated near the riverside, 4th of July 1757. At Week St Mary the grass was newly mown, 2nd of October 1757. At Cullompton the people stood in a half moon, 7th of September 1754. At St Ives they sat on the hedges which in that district would be broad stone walls, 21st of August 1770. It was in Richard Merchant's field at Bath that Wesley was interrupted by Beau Nash and got the better of him in a battle of words. And that's in a letter to James Hutton, 7th of June 1739. After Wesley had turned the tables on Nash, an old woman in the crowd addressed the latter, "Sir, if you ask what we come here for, we come for the food of our souls. You care for your body, we care for our souls." At that Nash walked away with never a word. At Tiverton many stood in the gardens and orchards flanking the meadow, 2nd of September 1750. Derry Anvil, near Portadown in Ulster, was depicted as a small village surrounded by a bog, but inhabited by lively Christians, 15th of June 1785. There Wesley preached in a shady orchard to an exceeding large congregation on a June morning. At Stanley, close to Winchcombe, there was not enough room in Farmer Finch's house, so the meeting was held in his orchard, 27th of April to July 1748. On one of his many parts to Bristol, Wesley preached in the old orchard, which was part of what had been a Dominican friary. The estate fell into the Penn family, through William's marriage, and the site was properly known as Quakers' Friars, 23rd of June 1747. In Ireland, Wesley once stood on a pedestal from which a statue of Patrick had fallen. It was in the middle of the grove at Downpatrick, which formed a perfect setting with the summer sun glimmering through the trees, 13th of June 1778. Wesley preached in many gardens, both private and public. Amongst those referred to by name are James Mears's at Oxford, 17th of October 1769, and John Stovin's at Crowell, 8th of July 1748. The latter belonged to a justice of the peace, and that fact helped to restrain so wild a congregation. Some of the gardens were attached to the Methodist meeting houses, which were springing up throughout the land. 18th of September 1749 at Tiverton, and 18th of April 1759 at Selby. In London, Wesley held services in the Great Gardens off Whitechapel Road on the 12th of September 1742. In the heat of summer, Wesley would seek the shade of a convenient tree, and scores of these are remembered up and down the land. Perhaps the most famous is that which survived until 1842 in the ground of Kingswood School. It was a sycamore, and on the 26th of June 1739, Wesley sheltered under it from a violent storm as he spoke. Work on the original school for colliers' children had been started only a few days previously. It was beneath this same sycamore that John Kennick stood not long before, waiting for a preacher to arrive from Bristol. When he failed to appear, Kennick was prevailed on to take his place, and thus began his evangelistic ministry. From John Kennick's journal in London Quarterly Review, July 1955. John Wesley's garden and walk are still shown to visitors, with a row of elms which he is reputed to have planted. At Derry, Wesley preached under a venerable old yew, supposed to have flourished in the reign of King James, if not of Queen Elizabeth, so he noted, 16th of June 1778. At Crome Hill, formerly Lambeg House, a residence of the Gare family with whom Wesley stayed, there are two beech trees growing into each other. Local legend has it that they were intertwined as saplings by Wesley, as a symbol of hope that Methodism and the Church of Ireland would be united. See Gill in The Steps of John Wesley, page 217. The vestry of the parish church at Bishop Burton, near Beverley in Humberside, houses a most unusual bust of Wesley. It is carved from the trunk of a huge elm under which he once preached on the village green. Wesley's last open-air sermon was delivered at the age of 87 at Winchelsea. He has left an account of the occasion. I stood under a large tree and called to most of the inhabitants of the town, "The kingdom of heaven is at hand, repent and believe the gospel." It seemed as if all that heard were, for the present, almost persuaded to be Christians. That's 7th of October 1790. The tree has been replaced, but an inscription recalls the facts and identifies it as an ash. The old chapel at Winchelsea proudly displays a collection box made from the wood. Wesley often preached in a yard, sometimes attached to a house, sometimes to a shop, sometimes to an inn. Sometimes it was the more genteel enclosure of a gentleman's residence. Sometimes it was a churchyard, as at Epworth, and a number of other places. He stood on a tombstone at Leominster and Osmotherley and Staveley, as well as on the resting place of his father's remains. At Leominster on the 13th of August 1746, Osmotherley 20th of April 1747, and Staveley 4th of June 1780, and the resting place of his father 6th of June 1742. At Zennor it was under the churchyard wall, 12th of July 1747. At Haworth, a scaffold had to be erected on the south side of the church, 3rd of August 1766. Services in the churchyard were sometimes held as the only option when the church itself was overfull. This happened, for example, at Codshaw in Lancashire on the 28th of August 1748. When Wesley led the congregation outside after the prayers, as he could see that many could not get in, he mounted the churchyard wall and pressed home the word of life from there. We cannot complete the list. Wesley preached in such unexpected places as a bowling green, a prehistoric mound, a shooting range, and a brickyard, his first open-air gathering on Hannam Mount at Kingswood, Bristol. And let's see, the bowling green was at Berwick-upon-Tweed on 14th of May 1761. The prehistoric mound at Clones on the 23rd of May 1778. The shooting range, 2nd of October 1754 at Old Sarum. And a brickyard on the 2nd of April 1739 near Hannam Mount at Kingswood. He preached on the beach when visiting Alderney on the 14th of August 1787. On the cliffs at Whitby on the 23rd of June 1761. And at St Ives on the 17th of September 1760. And down at the quay in Bridlington on the 23rd of August 1777. Robin Hood's Bay, 20th of June 1770, Bristol, 8th of May 1753, and Plymouth, 4th of September 1763, and there's another one on the 1st of September 1776, I believe also at Plymouth. That brings us more summarily to Wesley's indoor preaching places. The weather would at times drive him to seek cover. As the years passed, he was well respected in the towns he included in his regular itinerary and was able to hire accommodation. Occasionally he was even offered it. His chief resorts were the market houses or the town halls. The latter were not always very attractive. At Bodmin he encountered the most dreary he ever saw on the 31st of August 1774. There was hardly any light to relieve the encircling gloom. Others were historic, like the Old Hall at Gainsborough, dating from the 15th century, but its impressive battlemented frontage, its beautiful oriel window, and two fine Tudor towers, 3rd of August 1759. Wesley also used a courthouse or session house, mainly in Ireland, where he had the fullest cooperation from the civic authorities. Galway he rated the neatest by far, 27th of May 1771. At Waterford, a file of musketeers ordered by the mayor guarded the door on the 1st of May 1787. The local assembly room also figures prominently amongst Wesley's preaching centres. These were usually in the hands of the gentry and reserved for social functions. It was a concession indeed that they should be given over to evangelistic purposes, but as Wesley asked himself at Wexford, were ever assembly rooms put to better use? 30th of April 1787. At Kilkenny, meetings were held in the Custom House, or Falsall, and at the toll booth, or Tolsey, at Gloucester. In Kilkenny, it's the 10th of July 1762, and at Gloucester, the 20th of March 1787. At Newcastle upon Tyne, he also used the old Custom House, a large commodious room near the quayside, the grand resort of publicans and sinners, 21st of May 1768. In Ireland, he preached in more than one exchange, for example, Kinsale on the 28th of May 1750 and at Youghal on the 28th of June 1765. Other public buildings included a library at Inverness and Yarmouth. Inverness, 27th of April 1770, Yarmouth, 18th of November 1776, a school at Exeter, 31st of August 1779, Coventry, 15th of July 1782, Southampton, 9th of August 1787, and Highgate, 15th of December 1788, and a university in the hall of Marischal College, Aberdeen, 4th of May 1761. These are a lot of dates. Wesley preached in a workshop at Newbury on the 5th of March 1770, a forge at Alpraham on the 4th of April 1751, a malt room which he found very draughty at Ashton, 24th of October 1769, in the corn market at Leominster on the 14th of August 1746, and Newport Isle of Wight on the 6th of October 1758, and the butter market at Canterbury as well. He went not only where work was done, but where leisure was enjoyed. He was not above taking a playhouse if it suited him. Some had fallen on lean days and were not in use. The New Wells in London, which is not to be confused with Sadler's Wells, was closed in 1750, and Wesley had it in May 1752. And on the 29th of April 1754, I am glad when it pleases God to take possession of what Satan esteemed his own ground. And at Sheerness, the old playhouse was filled from end to end on the 5th of December 1769. At Kendal, what was the theatre is now a furniture store. It was used not only by Wesley, but by Whitfield, and some of Lady Huntingdon's preachers too. They evidently spoke from the window overlooking the marketplace, rather than to an audience inside. 9th of April 1753. At Newbury, Wesley wished to hire the playhouse, but as he explained caustically, the good mayor would not suffer it to be so profaned. 5th of March 1770. In Cavan, he actually gave his message in a ballroom on the 28th of May 1785. When we come to consider Wesley's congregations, we shall be seeing how he visited prisons, workhouses, hospitals and asylums, but much of his indoor preaching was done in private houses. Many rooms are still indicated as having been the scene of one of Wesley's services. Sometimes it was a cottage, like Diggory Isball's at Trewind on the 2nd of April 1744 and 15th of July 1745. Diggory and Elizabeth Ispell were the first fruits of John Nelson's ministry in Cornwall. The cottage was rescued from demolition in 1947 by Mr. Stanley Soughton and restored by Sir George Oatley. Sometimes it was a fashionable residence like Lady Huntingdon's London home. 7th, 9th, 11th of August 1748 and the 27th of March 1769. Sometimes it was a rectory like Charles Caulfield's at Killiman on the 14th of June 1789. Sometimes Wesley simply used the house as a pulpit for an open-air meeting, speaking from the doorway, a window or a balcony, such as at Wickham on the 19th of May 1752, Brecknock, 19th of August 1763, Stockton-on-Tees, 11th of June 1770, Llanelli, 18th of August 1774, Athlone on the 1st of April 1748, Winterton, 8th of August 1761, Scarborough, 25th of June 1761, and Penzance, 21st of August 1776. Sometimes it was only a loft, like the one at Merryweather's house in Yarm on the 6th of July 1759. Anyone with whom the evangelist stayed was liable to find his house turned into a chapel. When Wesley spent the night at an inn, he would invariably use the yard or the door as a pulpit. It would be an intriguing exercise to trace all these hostelries. Many of them are still in business, though not always under the same sign. The most nauseating experience in this connection was when Wesley preached in an upper chamber of a 15th century building which formed part of the George Inn at Bedford. We had a pretty large congregation, but the stench from the swine under the room was scarce supportable. Was ever a preaching place over a hog-sty before? Surely they love the gospel who come to hear it in such a place. That was 23rd of November 1759. John Walsh had been there the previous year and found that many had left off hearing from the Armenian magazine volume 3 in 1780. No wonder. More than once Wesley preached in a stable. One at Stafford was a deplorable hall, 29th of March 1784 and the 25th of January 1748, when Wesley is said to have preached in the stables of the Green Dragon Inn at Fisherton, near Salisbury. He also made use of an army riding school not only in Ireland, but in Worcester and Northampton. The 17th of April 1760 in Dublin, Tullamore, 16th of August 1778, Athlone, 19th of April 1789, Worcester, 14th of March 1769, and Northampton, 28th of November 1767. He often found himself in a farmhouse or an adjoining barn. At Godmanchester he preached in a barn where John Berridge and Henry Venn had often been before, on the 25th of November 1774. Near Chertsey he held a service in a large summer house, even though it was February. It was supported by a wooden frame which split. The congregation, left without any panic, had stood in the garden, 5th of February 1750. Throughout his evangelistic ministry, and more especially as the years passed, Wesley preached in churches whenever they were open to him. He preferred to go to the parish church if possible, but he was increasingly prepared to take advantage of dissenting chapels when they were offered. A long list could be produced to show that his initial reluctance to preach in nonconformist places of worship was overcome. We find him in Presbyterian, Independent, Baptist and Quaker meeting houses. Let's see. For Presbyterian, Swalwell, 29th of June 1759, Whedon, 27th of November 1767, Coot Hill, 23rd of May 1778, Banbury, 24th of November 1784, Tunbridge Wells, 6th of December 1784, Newry, 16th of June 1785, Northampton, 1st of November 1785, London Old Jewry, Christmas Eve 1786, 8th and 9th of June 1787, Ballymena and Antrim. Yarmouth, 13th of August 1787. Berwick-on-Tweed, 23rd of May 1788. Belfast, 8th of June 1789, and that one was the first Presbyterian meeting house in Rosemary Street. Wesley described as the completest place of public worship he had ever seen. Now let's look at the independent places. Chesham, 17th of October 1771. Plymouth, 15th of August 1773. Delft, 7th of April 1780. Trowbridge, 12th of September 1780. Sandwich on the Isle of Wight, 26th of November 1788. Tiverton, 1st of September 1789. Towcester, 25th of November 1789. And Bridlington, 24th of June 1790. In a Baptist, on the 17th of June 1780 at Boston. And Quaker meeting houses, Skircote Green near Halifax on the 24th of February 1746, and in London on the 10th of September 1756. Denominational boundaries were gladly crossed when the opportunity afforded itself. He even preached in the Ceseda Chapel in Armagh and the Calvinist Chapel at Carmarthen, where Peter Williams was pastor. In Armagh, 17th of June 1767, and at Carmarthen, 11th of August 1769. And as the new Methodist buildings were erected, of course he employed them too, though not all were large enough for the purposes of evangelism. On a number of occasions he preached in the Celebre Chapel, which was in the process of erection. But with all this, it still remains the fact that by far the majority of Wesley's mission sermons were preached elsewhere than in a building designed for worship. His real pulpit was where the people were. His evangelism was not of the passive sort, if that is worthy of the name, which waits for unbelievers to come to church. His was essentially an outgoing ministry to take the gospel, as the Saviour did, to the man and woman in the street. And next week, God willing, we will look at chapter 12, The People Gathered. And until then, as always, may God bless you all. Amen.